We need to begin this story not in the camps, but in the quiet, ordinary streets of Europe. Before the world descended into darkness, millions of Jewish people lived normal lives woven into the fabric of the continent. They were your neighbors, your doctors, your teachers, and your shopkeepers. They had fought for Germany in the First World War, earning iron crosses for bravery, believing their patriotism was unquestionable. But a poison was already coursing through the veins of society, a poison that had existed for centuries: antisemitism. This was not a new hatred. It was an ancient prejudice, a conspiracy theory that blamed Jewish people for society's deepest problems, from economic collapses to plagues. When Germany was defeated in the First World War and humiliated by the Treaty of Versailles, the nation was crushed by a sense of victimhood and economic chaos. Money became worthless. People pushed wheelbarrows full of cash just to buy a loaf of bread. In this fog of anger and despair, a man named Adolf Hitler provided a simple, terrifying answer. He pointed a finger and told the German people, "Look, there is the enemy." He took the old, ugly lies of antisemitism and twisted them into a racial science, claiming that Jewish people were not just a religious group, but a biological threat, a parasite destroying the body of the pure Aryan race. It sounds insane to a rational mind, but to a desperate population, it was a seductive narrative. It gave them someone to blame. The shadow of this hatred began to stretch over every street, every school, and every home, and the world, distracted and weary, simply did not look away fast enough. The horror did not start with mass shootings. It started with lawyers, judges, and carefully typed documents. The Nazis were meticulous in their cruelty, and they wanted to cloak their barbarism in the appearance of legality. In 1935, they introduced the Nuremberg Laws, a set of regulations that systematically dismantled the citizenship of Jewish people. Imagine, one day you are a citizen with rights, and the next, a piece of paper declares you are merely a subject with no protection under the law. These laws forbade marriages and even relationships between Jews and non-Jews, calling it racial defilement. It turned neighbors into informants and love into a crime. Then came the visual branding. Every Jewish person was forced to adopt the middle name Israel or Sarah on their identity papers, making them instantly identifiable to any official. Later, they were forced to wear the yellow Star of David, not just as an identifier, but as a target. A child wearing that star could not play in the park. A shopkeeper wearing that star would see their customers vanish. This was the prelude to violence, a bureaucratic process designed to isolate, dehumanize, and strip away every last layer of dignity. They took away the right to own pets, to ride bicycles, and to sit on a public bench. To the world watching, these might have seemed like minor cruelties compared to what was to come, but these laws served a deadly purpose. They tested the water. They conditioned the German population to accept that Jewish people were not like them, that they were an outsider race whose suffering was a matter of legal procedure, not moral outrage. By November of 1938, the rhetoric had reached a boiling point, and it finally erupted into a nationwide frenzy of fire and glass. A young Jewish man, distraught over the treatment of his parents, shot a German diplomat in Paris. The Nazis used this single act as a pretext to unleash a pogrom of terrifying scale. That night, November 9th, became known as Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. It was not a spontaneous outburst of public anger, it was a coordinated attack ordered by the highest ranks of the party. Across Germany and Austria, stormtroopers and civilians destroyed over 7,000 Jewish businesses and set fire to hundreds of synagogues. Imagine the sound of a Torah scroll being torn, of ancient sacred books being thrown into the street to burn, of furniture crashing from upper-story windows. The sky glowed orange with sacred flames, but the real terror was happening inside the homes. Men were dragged out of their beds, beaten, and humiliated in front of their crying children. Around 30,000 Jewish men were arrested simply for being Jewish and sent to concentration camps like Dachau and Buchenwald. They were told that if they signed over their property and agreed to leave Germany, they might be released. Here was the ultimate cruelty: the victim was forced to pay for the damage of the riot. The German government fined the Jewish community 1 billion marks for provoking the destruction. The message was crystal clear and brutal. You are not wanted. You are not safe. The window of escape was slamming shut, and the shards of glass on the ground were a warning of the blood that would soon flow. With the outbreak of the Second World War, Germany's armies swept across Europe, and behind them came the architects of genocide. Their first major act of territorial conquest was to squeeze the Jewish population into tiny, suffocating districts within the cities. These were the ghettos, and the most infamous was in Warsaw. In an area meant for only a fraction of that number, the Nazis crammed nearly 500,000 human beings behind brick walls topped with barbed wire. It was a slow-motion death trap designed to starve people into submission. Food rations were calculated to be just enough to sustain life for a few weeks, roughly 184 calories per day. That is less than a slice of bread. In this cramped hell, life became a desperate fight for a potato peel or a crust. The streets were filled with the tragic figures of smugglers, small children who squeezed through sewers and cracks in the wall to the outside world, risking a bullet for a sack of flour to bring back to their starving parents. Typhus spread like wildfire because there was no clean water or soap. The dead became so numerous that carts could not keep up, and bodies lay wrapped in paper, a silent, grim fixture of the sidewalk. Yet, even here, in the shadow of starvation, humanity fought back. Underground schools taught children to read Hebrew, orchestras played secret concerts, and theatrical performances allowed souls to escape the mud and misery for a few hours. The ghettos were not just holding pens, they were a testament to human resilience, a proof that culture and dignity can survive in a collapsing room, even as the architects of the final solution were drawing up plans for something even more unthinkable beyond the walls. When the German army invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, a different kind of killing machine followed in their tracks. These were mobile killing squads called the Einsatzgruppen. Their job was not to fight soldiers, it was to murder civilians, entire communities, man, woman, and child, from the elderly to the newborn. This was the Holocaust by bullets, a face-to-face slaughter that reveals the terrifying intimacy of the crime. It happened in forests, ravines, and valleys on the outskirts of small towns. The most famous of these killing fields is a place called Babi Yar, a ravine outside the city of Kiev. In just 2 days, nearly 34,000 Jewish people were systematically murdered there. The method was chillingly methodical. People were ordered to undress, to fold their clothes neatly, and were then marched in groups to the edge of the pit. They were made to lie down on top of the bodies of those who had just been shot. A German officer would then walk over the heap of the dead and dying, firing a pistol into the back of each skull. Blood would run down the slopes like a river. The psychological toll on the killers was high, not from guilt, but from the strain of murdering women and children up close all day. Some men went insane, others drowned their reactions in vodka. This was a turning point in the machinery of murder. The Nazi high command realized that shooting millions of people was too public, too slow, and too heavy a burden on the consciences of their men. They needed a method that was cleaner, more detached, and industrial. The horror of the ravine proved to be the birth certificate of the death camp, a cold and detached factory where the killers could distance themselves from the blood, even as the scale of the killing defied all imagination. A conference was held in a wealthy suburb of Berlin, in a villa by a lake, called Wannsee. There, High-ranking Nazis gathered not to debate if they should annihilate the Jews of Europe, but how to do it with maximum efficiency. They spoke in euphemisms, talking about evacuation and resettlement, but everyone in that room understood the real meaning was extinction. Out of this bureaucratic meeting came the blueprint for the industrial death camp. Unlike the ghettos or the mobile squads, this was a factory designed with a single product: death. The most infamous of these factories was Auschwitz-Birkenau, a massive complex in occupied Poland that combined forced labor with mass murder. Trains carrying cattle cars packed with human cargo would roll through the red brick gatehouse, and the air would be thick with the smell of burning flesh. Immediately upon arrival, a selection took place. A doctor, often the infamous Joseph Mengele, would stand on the ramp and, with a flick of a finger, decide who lived and who died. The young and strong might be sent to the right, to have their hair shaved, their clothes stolen, and a number tattooed into their arm, destined for slow death by starvation and hard labor. The vast majority, however, the mothers with children, the elderly, the sick, were sent to the left. They were told they were going to take a shower to disinfect. They were told to remember the hook where they left their coat. This was the final, cruel lie. The chambers were sealed, not to wash them, but to gas them with Zyklon B, a cyanide-based pesticide. The architecture of the camp was designed to industrialize the ending of life, to turn the massacre of millions into a cold, calculated process of transport, selection, and disposal, a dark assembly line that ran day and night. To understand the Holocaust, one must try to comprehend a world where the rules of civilization have been completely inverted, where a piece of bread is worth more than a diamond, and a shoe made of wood is a treasure. For those not immediately murdered, life in the camps was a systematic assault on the soul. The moment you arrived, your identity was erased. Your hair was cut, your clothes were replaced with a thin, striped uniform, and your name was taken, replaced by a number burned into your flesh. Sleep meant cramming together on a hard wooden bunk, often 5 or 6 people wide, covered in a single, thin blanket in the freezing winter. Food was a hallucination of sustenance. A morning liquid they called coffee, a watery turnip soup for lunch, and a scrap of bread with a sliver of margarine for dinner. The hunger was so profound that men would fight and die for a potato. The work was purposefully brutal and meaningless, dragging heavy stones from one side of a quarry to the other, just to break the spirit. Yet, in this kingdom of ashes, the flame of humanity flickered stubbornly. There were secret prayer groups, risking death to celebrate the Sabbath. There were intellectuals who recited poetry from memory, turning the barracks into an invisible university. There were mothers who traded their last breath of energy to soothe a terrified child not their own. These micro moments of compassion, a shared whisper, a smuggled aspirin, a hand held in the darkness, were profound acts of resistance. In a place designed to turn people into animals fighting for survival, choosing to remain human was the ultimate victory. There is a dangerous myth that the victims of the Holocaust went to their deaths like lambs to the slaughter. The truth is far more complicated and heroic. As the liquidation of the Warsaw Ghetto began, when the remaining Jews realized that the trains were not taking them to labor camps but to the gas chambers of Treblinka, a small group of young fighters decided that if they were going to die, they would die fighting. They were armed with a handful of pistols, a few rifles, and bottles filled with gasoline to throw at tanks. On the day the German army entered the ghetto to deport its final inhabitants, they were met with bullets. For nearly a month in the spring of 1943, this ragtag army held off the full might of the German war machine. It was an uprising born of utter hopelessness, a fight for dignity, not survival. Mordecai Anielewicz, the young commander, wrote that the dream of his life had risen to become a fact: Jewish self-defense. The Germans had to burn down the entire ghetto block by block to extinguish the rebellion. Even then, fighters clung to the sewers, emerging like ghosts to ambush soldiers. This spirit erupted elsewhere, too. In the Treblinka death camp, prisoners staged a revolt, setting the camp on fire and running through the minefields, knowing most would not survive, but hoping a few would escape to tell the world the truth. And in Sobibor, another death factory, a mass escape led by a Soviet prisoner of war succeeded in breaking down the fences. These acts of defiance did not stop the machinery, but they shattered the facade of apathy. They proved that even in the darkest pit, the human demand for freedom and justice can explode with a furious light. By the end of 1944, the Allied armies were closing in from both the east and the west. The German leadership knew the war was lost, but they were determined to hide the evidence of their crime. They began evacuating the camps, forcing the surviving prisoners on brutal treks through the freezing winter. These were the death marches. Imagine being so starved that your legs are like sticks, yet you are forced to walk for miles in wooden clogs through deep snow, guarded by shouting men with dogs. Anyone who stumbled or fell behind was shot in the back of the head. The roads of Central Europe became a trail of frozen corpses, a final spasm of senseless violence even as the Reich crumbled. Finally, the camps were liberated. The soldiers who stumbled upon these places were hardened men who had survived D-Day and fierce battles, but nothing prepared them for what they found. At Dachau, at Buchenwald, at Bergen-Belsen, they found piles of unburied dead, they found living skeletons too weak to cheer, and they found the smell of death so thick it clung to their uniforms for days. The famous broadcaster Edward R. Murrow walked into Buchenwald and reported that the dead were stacked up like cordwood, and it seemed as if the living skeletons, had been polished. The scale of the crime was no longer a rumor whispered in diplomatic cables. It was a visible, undeniable, ghastly reality. The world had to look into the open eye sockets of the survivors and admit that this was not a side effect of war, this was a war in itself, a war against an entire people, and the cost of looking away had been 6 million lives. The guns fell silent, the camps were liberated, and the survivors walked out of the shadows into a world that could barely comprehend their pain. But the story of the Holocaust does not end in 1945. It left a wound that stretches across generations. There are survivors who wake up in a panic every night, still smelling the smoke of the crematoria. There are children and grandchildren who carry the unspoken trauma in their very DNA, a silence that echoes through family dinners. This event is not simply a chapter in a history book that we turn and move on from. It is a mirror. It forces us to confront the terrifying question of what ordinary human beings are capable of doing when hatred is allowed to become law, when apathy becomes complicity, and when dehumanization becomes state policy. To say, never forget, is not just to remember the 6 million murdered. It is to remember the fragility of civilization. We must remember the doctors who broke their Hippocratic oath to conduct twisted experiments, and we must remember the righteous individuals who risked their own lives to hide a neighbor in an attic. We must remember that this catastrophe was a gradual tightening of the noose, step by legal step, insult by insult, brick by brick. The warning signs are never a sudden burst of violence, they are quiet, creeping shadows. It is a heavy burden to hold this memory, to look at the piles of shoes and spectacles and hair without looking away. But we must. Because to forget is to grant the perpetrators a posthumous victory. In the words of the great survivor and writer Elie Wiesel, to forget the dead would be akin to killing them a second time. Thank you for taking this walk of remembrance with me. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and guard the truth with your lives.